how much truth can there be in a lie? And conversely, are there some truths that can only be told with a lie? This is a question that has plagued humanity for forever, as long as we've been philosophizing. Because as we push, the boundaries of what we know about the world, we keep bumping into these esoteric ideas and things that appear as truths that can only be articulated by things like metaphor or parable or proverbs or stories and stuff. These are poetic observations about mankind, their nature, their place in the world, and all major religious texts and cultures have this. Some story or poetry meant to convey a deeper truth about the nature of mankind that otherwise couldn't be conveyed as a statement of facts, nor would they be received as a truth if they could. And that's an important thing to remember about communicating, ideas and cultures and stuff like that throughout history. It's not only what you say that matters, the message, it's also about what's received. You can talk the objective truth all day, but if someone can't receive or understand the message, that's a massive barrier. But if you could convey those same truths in a story or a metaphor or some context that could be absorbed, now we can open up a dialogue. And I point out this duality of truth intermingled with stories and lies because it's the core of our subject today. We are talking about the Nords, a faction from the game Conquest by Bellum. Rough and tumble raiders from the cold norths of Ea who developed on a totally different social track than anything in the Old Dominion, which represented most of mankind in the early parts of the lore. They didn't see Haslia, the god of man, as their god, because they didn't need him. They had a whole pantheon of gods. And while their background on the surface level seems very simple, like Norse mythology just overlaid on a semi-fantasy world, there is a ton going on here. Because the story of Odin and Loki and the betrayal at Yggdrasil, well, that's just the story or the metaphor, the lie, meant to convey the deeper truths of a history. That these people don't have a frame of reference to be able to absorb otherwise, if it wasn't wreathed in mythology and stuff. And so we're going to begin by exploring these two stories. Of course, beginning with the Nord perspective, the tales that they tell each other and their generations to build up their mythos and cultural heritage. Then we'll pivot to the truth, and we'll have a whole bunch of talk about starting Nords and why you should play this faction, because I picked it up this year and I'm having a blast. But as I said, we're going to start with the Nords' internal perspective. So long ago, mankind spread to the cold norths. And this group up here was terrorized by the Jotnars. These were horrible giants that were a constant threat to the small mortal folk who tried to carve out a life there. Then the gods came. A brilliant golden light filled the skies, and the great tree of life Yggdrasil was birthed and burrowed its roots deep into the tundra, so deep that it pierces all the frozen rocks and all that kind of stuff deep into the core to get nutrients. From a parapet, the gods, this whole pantheon of higher beings who arrived on fair Yggdrasil, made themselves known in a proclamation. Odin, the leader, and his pantheon, these gods looked upon the Nords and saw them as capable warriors. So they said, we're going to help you out. And the gods banished the Jotnars, fought them back into caves, and then turned and spoke to these mortals, essentially telling them, war is coming to this realm. We have come on Yggdrasil to stop an evil that's brewing in the south. We, the gods, are looking to build an army from the best and brightest. And we see how hard you fought to carve a life out here and fight the Jotnars, and we're impressed. And so we want to take your finest and elevate them into demigods, called the Einherjar, and they're going to sleep until the day of the final battle known as Ragnarok. At which point, we essentially wake all the Einherjar up, all the greatest warriors, and we have the battle of the apocalypse kind of thing. And for a long period of time, this is exactly how it went down from their perspective. The Nords would go out and raid or defend their territories or have gladiatorial games against each other, all under the watchful eye of these gods. Especially brave or keen warriors who fell in battle were taken up to Yggdrasil to be elevated. and then rest until the moment was right. We don't have a specific timeline of how long this went on for or how many were elevated, but it seems to be quite a bit. Well, at some point, the day came. A strange and horrid army of heavily armored warriors moved up from the south and attacked Yggdrasil. However, the Einherjar did not awaken as Odin told them they would. There was sabotage afoot as one of the gods, Loki, for his own gain, betrayed Odin and ensured that his army never awoke. Because that happened, Yggdrasil burned, because its main defense was never used. The Nords were shattered and scattered, and at this point, every once in a while, from generation to generation, a random Einherjar will wake up from their slumber, bewildered by the fact that they missed the final battle that they were elevated for, but essentially trying to carve out a life leading the Nords. Some of them even went on to have children, their demigod physiques causing odd blessings to these kids, and this is where we end up with units like the Uger and so on. And the faction exists in the context we know now, in kind of the shadow of their own mythology. Ragnarok came and went and they survived, which means for these particular Nords, they're living their own Mad Max post-apocalyptic life. Right? For the rest of us, it's just Tuesday. And this is the story that the Nords bring forth into all of their logic and thinking. When the named character from the most recent lore campaign series went out, she was looking for artifacts of the gods who elevated Einherjar. Like they take it very literally, this mythos, and are constantly seeking validation for it. Now I want to swiftly retell that exact same story from a different perspective. We'll call it a third person, one that's not laced with allegory and story, because while the Nords needed that to make sense of this dynamic, you and I do not. We can think outside the box, so stick an edible up your nose and roll with me here, because it's true that long ago, humans settled far north and were under constant threat from the Jotnar. Those are just literal giants. We see them in the army now. They're just a breed of creature. At this time, a ship, a bioorganic ship, descends from the heavens. Again, biological feat of engineering from an alien race that we only know as the Exiles. This is a splinter of the same faction that would later develop into the Spires, and as they were just announced, the Weavers. All of those factions started as a kind of a collective race that we know as the Exiles. Well, they descended onto this planet and could see which way the winds were blowing with an enemy far to the south that we know as the Old Dominion. So once the Exiles arrived, they set about creating a defensive perimeter. How are we going to handle if that civilization in the south comes and tries to fight us? Well, this is a species with accents to biomancy, the ability to engineer life and organic material. So, their plan was to take the stock of a highly malleable but tough local species and modify them into a biological defense system, and then just have them fight the war for you. The boasting about gods and all the wars and the trials, it's all just to sift through candidates with this genetic therapy operation to create this army. This went on for some time, and it's eventually here that the Old Dominion arrived. Now, I actually want to put a point here because it just occurred to me as I was recording this. The, I think it's Ashes and Faith campaign system that we got, where it's Old Dominion and Nords, actually covers this exact moment because the character for the Old Dominion in there is the character who was here at this battle. And what he sees blows his mind because this is a human character from a highly religious cult-like sect of the Old Dominion, and he walks in to see this bioorganic machine, and a lot of the Nord exile stuff, their gods, are described as these kind of like uncanny valley humanoid things that are just like, again, they're just doing surgeries to augment humans, but it looks very creepy and macabre. Well, when those characters arrive, the Einherjar never awaken. Again, there was some kind of betrayal at the highest echelon of leadership, and so they remained underground in a form of stasis. Now, the machines keeping the Einherjar seem to kind of hiccup every blue moon or so, and either kill an Einherjar or spit them out. And that's why they randomly pop up here and there throughout the Nord history. Now, the exiles here were annihilated. This particular, spire tower, however you want to articulate it, was just annihilated. Yggdrasil was set ablaze from the inside, and these people were scattered. Now, their offspring bear some of the marks of this past genetic tampering. Like we talked about the Ughur, right? That's a genetic malformation that is actually quite practical for the Nords. They use them as units, and inadvertently act as living proof of their mythos, even though they don't understand it. That is the brief synopsis of the history of the Nords. Again, two perspectives that are almost telling the same story, but we need the lie because they can't comprehend the truth. And so I want to pivot with that kind of cultural understanding into modern stories. Right? The Nords today, as we know them in the story, are about survival, plunder, and for a few, their history. The average Nord army is essentially a Jarl that by hook or by crook gets a gaggle of Nords to follow him on a raid. If successful, meaning they come back with food and money and wealth and all that kind of stuff, that Jarl will raise in stature. If he fails, he's probably dead, but if not, he'll be flogged when he gets back home. Now, the reason that they raid south and honestly hit up a lot of the 100 Kingdoms is because a lot of the Nord lands up north are just too hard to farm. And in a society filled with bravado and machismo, how well you can go out and provide for the tribe is the real measure of power. It doesn't matter if you're man or woman. There's all different kinds of warriors of everything, different kinds of weapons. All that matters is that you can go out and get what you need. Yes, it's about personal wealth. I went out and I took this thing, but also people follow leaders who can ensure that their needs are met. If they want gold, if they need the city defended, if they need food, they expect the Jarls and the kings that they herald to go out and solve those problems. Every Nord is building their own saga and pushing to outdo their kin. Now, from that point, kind of moving back from the army part, which is what we engage with, what a village or a tribe looks like is almost hard to say, simply because the concept is so broad. I mentioned this in a video for a different game system, but like when we mention the word tribe, right, that could be anything from 12 people to like over 2,000. So like it's crazy. Not only is it different in terms of size, but some tribes will have more god-touched, meaning genetic hiccups, like the Ughur and trolls and stuff like that, than others. Others are all human mortals, regular people just trying to live a life. And they're really great as a storytelling faction because they're always like active, right? The Nords are going out to raid. There's not a ton about their story that has them being very like still or sedentary. And because of that, they're easy to slip into newer Conquest lore. A big one that I've mentioned so far has been, I think it's Fire and Ash, or Fire and Faith, I can't remember, the narrative box that contains Old Dominion and Nords. Well, that Nord witch is seeking an artifact from Yggdrasil that essentially elevates humans into Einherjar. She wants to find it, because one, it's proof of her religion, but also, she is a character who's starting to understand that there's a technological component here. Like, maybe it's still magic, but it's a magic machine, and machines can be understood. Side note here, when they find that this thing that elevates humans into Einherjar, it looks like a creepy Slender Man faceless human inside of an amber egg. Like if you put Slender Man inside of one of those little pill capsules that Neo was in the Matrix, it kind of sounds like that. And the reason I bring that up is because when they're talking about their history and mythos in this exalted time, it's creepy stuff. Like if you saw that in real life today, you'd have to burn it and burn the whole building down and nuke the state. You know what I mean? It's worse than finding a spider. And that's only one end of the spectrum, right? Because she's super into the historical past and piecing together the history of a people who they're not super into recording their history, and she's trying to go on this big mission. And then on the other side of the spectrum are Nords who think those are just stories. We don't care. Even if they were true, they do not matter to us now because the world ended. So, let's just be Vikings. For others, they're like, well, maybe it is true, but I say we just Mad Max the heck out of this post-apocalypse and just have some fun with it. And still for others, that last one being more of a death cult, and then for others, they want to research and understand it. So I guess my point is, like I said, it's hard to talk about a tribe because they could be so vastly different in terms of their makeup, their size, their goals, their reflections upon their own mythos, which they would all know, but they don't all have to respond to it the same. Now, like most of the factions that Parabellum puts out, there are three kind of sub-factions or I guess, themes within the Nord army on a practical sense. Translating that as we go from story to tabletop and stuff like that. The three different themes that exist both thematically and in game terms are the Exalted, the Half-Bloods, and the Mortals. So when I say exist in the rule sense and thematically with the lore, what I mean is these are three sub-factions that all have lore pages on the Parabellum website, but also they are representative of three different strains of keywords that help you build your army in the game. So Half-Bloods is going to feature a lot of like Ogre and Trolls and stuff like that. The Mortals is going to be more about Raiders and Huskarls, logically. So the first one is the Exalted, as I mentioned, and this really came about when the Einherjar started to reawaken after things settled down from the initial apocalypse. Obviously, these are chosen, exalted, living embodiments of their mythos and history and deities. They were chosen because they're the best and the brightest. They make natural leaders, and so Nord tribes and people started to congregate and drift towards these Einherjar that exist. It is a position that is commonly held, or commonly called the High King, which is essentially a way of saying, it's not that I have a kingdom, it's that we're all kings, and it's kind of a first amongst equals type of position. And the Einherjar who kind of goes off and on of being the High King is Arnbjorn, the Einherjar ruler of Erheim. Although at certain points in history, he'll relinquish command to let somebody else take control, and then he'll come back again, because he's functionally immortal. He can just outlast anything. Well, the Exalted are essentially the highest echelon of leadership that have formed and galvanized around this person. So like there's the Einherjar at the top, he's your High King. There's then a council, his particular lords, and then also like the High Kings, or sorry, not High Kings, the regular kings of all the various tribes that are kind of existing within his kingdom. They all come together, and this is that group of specialty. So what that means for us, practically speaking, is that this is the subfaction of the Konungir. This is a particular kind of hero that's been exalted in some fashion. They essentially bear the right and authority of the High King themselves. They go to his parties, his feasts. They can raid with him if he ever goes out. Like they're the core group, but they're taken from amongst all the various tribes to make sure that when they disperse, some aspect of his authority and power is going to all the different places. In-game, this is good for us because the Konungir are great heroes because they have just a wide array of things they can pull from, befitting someone who can pull rank and kind of, bring desperate tribes together to achieve a mission. Next up, as mentioned before, are the Half-Bloods. There's a line in here that I love. It's the Half-Bloods are the first and faintest shadow cast by the Einherjar. Mortal vessels twisted by the exalted blood they inherited from their divine parents. Essentially, as the Einherjar then breed with humans, a sequence of genetic hiccups begins. And over centuries, these have formed distinct kinds of mutations that they then, birds of a feather flock together and put them together. So if enough people are born with the hiccup that makes Ogre, they then have a unit or regiment of Ogre with them. Stalkers inherit the keen sentence of great hunters. Trolls inherit a kind of regenerative ability. It's just all different manifestations of being a test subject for a highly crazy program by the Spire or by the Exiles. For a lot of them, their gifts, in quotes, are out of control, meaning it's hard for an Ogre to be smart and delicate. They don't have full faculties. Some, however, do. Is it the Vargskir? I think it's how it's pronounced. Essentially, werewolf leader man. That's a type of character who is essentially able to, through willpower, kind of direct or channel their rage or their mutations into a direction. Essentially, a little bit higher level of sentience and control. But animalistic enough that they can see with cunning and all their abilities what needs to happen. Now, the last group of course is the Mortals, which it might seem easy to skip over because it's like, oh yeah, these are like the normal humans or whatever. These are post-apocalyptic Vikings who walk amongst evidence of their gods every single day. That's pretty rad. Even within there are different kinds. So like, for example, there is a religious, essentially arcane order where we get the Valkyries from. Different forms of hunters and fighters from Raiders and Huskarls. And then you have wild men like bearsarks, just all different kinds of flavors of humans that do very different things. For me personally, this is where I tend to go. For whatever reason, much to my own detriment of painting time, I love horde armies. I love just a lot of different powerful units. So my army right now is like 3 things of raiders, a fat block of huskarls, a fat block of bearsarks, a reinforced thing of valkyries. I think the only like non-mortal thing I have is the sea Jotnar, and that's just because I love the model. But I wanted a force that represented the raiding aspect. This is the thing, everybody gets into a boat, and the sea Jotnar, I guess, runs underwater beneath them or something, I don't know. And then they all just come up on the shore together. Thematically, that's what I wanted to do, and it's what the mortal aspect of this faction would be best at. Now, Conquest does not have books in the same way that like Games Workshop has books with Black Library or whatever. However, there are 3 stories that if you are new to the game, I'm going to have the links to them down below, but go over to the Bellum website, and there are 3 stories that you should really look at. These are totally free short stories you can read that give you a good idea of the history and mythos of the faction, and those are Situation in Mannheim, Mannheim being our realm. The next one is called On the Gods of Yggdrasil, essentially exploring the internal mythos. And the last one is called 3 Views on Mannheim, which again plays with the perspective theme, I guess, amongst the Nords. Like I said, they're all for free on the Bellum website. Go check them out. They have wonderful writers. They just haven't put out any full-length novels yet. Pivoting more towards the tabletop, let's talk about how the Nords play. A typical Nord strategy is just going to be a lot of pressure. So you're going to have successive waves, usually with raiders going up first, rushing in. There's a lot of impact. The idea being like they're throwing axes as they're charging into battle, which I love. They have a lot of momentum, and they want to rush up and seize objective terrain faster than their opponent. They tend to have lower defense scores, but a lot of them have evasion 1, some can get evasion 2. And there's just a big mix of different kinds of units. One of the things that drew me to the army was just the sheer variety. So if I want to go, light and fast, I'm going to tap into the half-bloods, and I'm going to get, all kinds of creatures and feral beasts out there. For me personally, I love to flood the battlefield with mortal bodies, as I mentioned before. So I have 3 things of raiders that are going to rush up and try to play defense on some objectives. And then my 3 hammers that I bring to every game are my Valkyries, my Huskarls, and my Bearsarks. And then there's a drunken sea Jotnar just kind of rolling around trying to see where he can get and cause trouble. I guess my point is that there's so many ways to build a Nords army that go from, very minimalist. You can go oops all Jotnars, not all Jotnars, but a lot of them make up a disproportionate amount of your army, all the way to something like I do, which is mortal spam. There's a lot of room for how you want to build your warband, but I would say starting with a good core to build upon is probably the smartest decision. Now, as far as what they're good at, I will say speed and aggression. I throw that first wave of raiders up. By the time they're dealt with, the second punch of those bigger, units that I'm talking about, Huskarls, Bearsarks, those are coming up behind now. I definitely want to invest in some ranged support next. I have almost none in my army. It's not good when your best gun is an anchor that the sea Jotnar can throw, but if you hit your enemy hard enough and then are able to flank them, ideally, it's not really a problem. Now, if you wanted to start a Nord army of your own, where would you start collecting them? Now, I'm going to put up here really quickly, if you would like to, you can save 10% on all your purchases from Bellum by using my affiliate link. It goes a long way to making this hobby affordable for you guys and supports my family. Thank you so much. And at the time of recording, Bellum has a few different sets available. Now, these are going to change, but I think you're going to see a lot of the same units involved with them. Bellum likes to rotate out different starter sets and stuff like that. And going in low to high in terms of cost, we start off with the First Blood cohort, which, if you're mostly playing First Blood, is a fantastic set of models. You get a smattering of a whole bunch of stuff. Huskarls, Raiders, Stalkers, Steel Chosen. There's a Fenrir Beast, which is sort of like your big wolf-type creature, a Jarl, and a Thane. These are fantastic if you're playing First Blood. If you're going to jump into the Rank and Flank, the Last Argument of Kings, there is the 2025 Supercharged set, which is a Jarl, 2 regiments of Huskarls, and then 3 boxes of the Bearsarks / Ulfundar kit. Essentially, the Bearsarks are a heavy infantry, and the Ulfundar are like a medium, kind of a speedier one. This set's an interesting one because, first of all, this is a complete regiment, which is fantastic if you're just starting. That's definitely the level I would say start playing at. Just pick a single, detachment for your hero. You're good to go. You get all the rule books you need, some terrain measuring stuff. This is a perfect one-player starter. From here, you can expand and get all the fun stuff. Or you can focus this as your mortal detachment and then move into a different warband that has, monsters and bowmen and all those kinds of strange things. At the price point of $160, this is probably where I direct most people unless you knew specifically what kind of Nord list you wanted to make. But as a principle, I don't follow my own advice, and so I went with this. This is the Iceborne Raiders 2000 point Nord army. And I went for this collection because of one very simple fact. If I thought the last one was great for helping you get through your basic infantry, this is the one that doubles that down. You get a Jarl, a Valva, which is the witch, ice witch kind of character, a Konungir, 2 boxes of the Bearsark multi-kits, 3 things of Raiders, 2 things of Huskarls, a Mountain Jotnar, and 2 regiments of Valkyries. This made up the predominant bulk of my particular army. The things that I dropped were the Konungir, the Mountain Jotnar, and I think there's Bow Chosen back here in the back that aren't listed. But yeah, that's really what I did. And I essentially just put in the Sea Jotnar and a few other goodies. Is it expensive? Yes. Is it a one-click army? Absolutely. If it were up to me, every game company would have a one-click full army thing for it. And they do typically have these. They just kind of swap them out with whatever kits or they want to push. But essentially, these all make fantastic ways to start. If you're going to start last Argument of Kings, the Supercharged set is fantastic. At $160, it's hard to beat that price point. I just like the convenience of a one-click army that gets all of my basic troops. I now have the collection I need to play anything, and I can, from this point, only buy the cool new weird stuff that I want. Regardless of which of these sets you go for, I know, and whether you're playing First Blood or Last Argument of Kings, one of the things that I think is really important is deciding on your chaff and your punches. And that's the way that I always describe things when it comes to creating armies for Conquest. My chaff is whatever is going to rush up and just kind of get in the way. Getting in the way can look like a lot of different things. There's the Dwegum unit that can run up with shields and then shoot. Getting in the way for them looks very defensive. Whereas for me and my particular tastes, I like using raiders to rush the board and, deny points on objectives and stuff like that, contest things. I love their speed, their aggression. Flurry is a fantastic rule. You could just as easily, though, if you're looking at trying a different kind of chaff, the Fenrir Beast Pack we talked about, those kinds of cat-wolf looking things, those are light and they are exceptionally fast, right? If the raider is balancing speed and combat efficiency, the Fenrir Beast Pack goes all for speed and they're great at it. So I guess my point is, like I said, decide on the kind of chaff because that's going to dictate what hero you have, and then choose a hammer or a fist. I go through different kind of metaphors here based on that. So because I like raiders, I'm going to look at heroes that allow me to take raiders. Well, the overlap of great units and that can be taken by heroes that can also take raiders includes Bearsarks. I love me some Bearsarks. So that's going to be one of my hammers. If I had chosen the Fenrir Beast Pack, I'm going to again look at those heroes who can take the Fenrir Beast Pack and also pick my favorite scary unit from Nords. That's like, I don't know, something that hits real hard. So that's what I mean, is decide what kind of chaff you want, whether it's infantry or beast, and then look around to see what can take them and what other units you think are cool. I think if you follow that, it will just minimize kind of like feel bad choices when you start building your army. Because sometimes when you start collecting random things, it might be tricky to use them all in one list, or you use them inefficiently or ineffectively, so you kind of get bummed out because your stuff gets killed too easy. I think if you just focus on tying up the board, because this is an aggressive army, just going to throw that out there. There's not much defensive about them. And then a way to have a second hard punch after that chaff is burned up, it'll put you on a good track to having fun with your Nords. And so I want to end this video like I end all of mine by simply asking the question, why would you want to play the Nords? Why would you want to be cool like your hero Doug? Well, the Nords are awesome. Let's just throw that out there. A fusion of fantasy, mythology, and sci-fi is absolutely the best. I love the idea of this kind of ancient aliens-esque like meddling that the species known as the Exiles have in the development of the planet. As someone who loves and appreciates the History Channel aliens meme, this is right up my alley. And the reason I got super interested in this faction, I will be honest with you, is if you haven't listened to it, my coverage of that lore campaign, the one that comes with the, I think it's an Archimandrite and the unique sculpt for the Volva as well, the Ice Witch. But yeah, Ashes and Faith or Fire, something like that, is the campaign set. And that book like blew my mind whole, because the Old Dominion character walks into Yggdrasil and he sees like organic machines that are like injecting people with stuff. It sounds like a horror show of just kind of like analog computers, streams of like bionutrients and stuff. We got to think about how alien this would look to these dudes. So he has his mind blown and essentially turns himself into a conduit of Haslia's power and magic. What it looked like practically in the book is that he goes Super Saiyan and blows himself up just so he can take down Yggdrasil. It was so horrifying to an outside human's mind that he had no choice but to just self-detonate. And this is the past that all these people are revering and deifying and trying to pull up. And that's why I mentioned the thing earlier about like whatever elevates Einherjar looks like a creepy version of whatever came out of, whatever capsule Neo was in the Matrix. It sounds horrifying. All of these things sound horrifying, but they venerate their past so much that it becomes almost comical, but not quite. They play aggressively on the table. Everything, for the most part, I feel, does what you would expect it to. Like, trolls are about regeneration instead of offense. Ogres are about being tough. The mortals are about rushing in and fighting. I mean, there's just a lot of things that, like, this feels right. I've noticed that a lot in playing the army, is just a lot of moments where I go, yeah, that's about what I expected, which is great. As you get excited for reading stories and seeing artwork and stuff like that, and you want these things to be cool in your mind, having them act that way on the table is just the best. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you are an existing Nords player, how would you recommend somebody start the faction, or why do you like it? Leave your answers in the comments down below. I always pin the most helpful comment because it helps out new players. And if there is a faction you would like one of these videos for next, please let me know in the comments down below as well. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Bellum video. Happy wargaming, friends.